Today we're going to be learning Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud Bet. Today's daf is sponsored anonymously in memory of the Chazon Ish, Avraham Yeshaya ben Shmaryahu Yosef. There's a sheet for today, so I don't know if it was put up in the chat, but please put it up, someone. Okay, here goes. We finished with this machloket. We started with the machloket, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, was the world created in Tishrei, which Rabbi Eliezer says. I came up with a good way to remember it. Rabbi Eliezer's name starts with Aleph and Tishrei starts with Taf. So first letter, last letter, it's a good way to remember. Kept struggling yesterday with remembering who said what. So Rabbi Eliezer says Tishrei, and Rabbi Yeshua says it's Nisan. Then we saw that affected also their interpretation about when the Mabul happened, when the flood. Was it, if it was Tishrei, right, where the world was created, then it ends up being in Cheshvan, where the Mabul happened. That's Rabbi Eliezer. And according to Rabbi Yeshua, no, it was in Nisan and Iyar. So now the Gemara is going to have a few questions of Rabbi Eliezer. We ended with a really big question, which is, we ended with this idea that how did God bring the Mabul? He took the constellation of Kima, took 2 stars from there, had to create rain. According to Rabbi Yeshua, it was a totally miraculous thing because normally Kima is not out during the day, and normally everything's drying up and all of a sudden rain came. Rabbi Eliezer, it seems like it was kind of more natural. Kima anyway is out during the day in that season, and the waters are that's exactly when it starts raining. The waters are strong, so it makes perfect sense. However, the wording of Rabbi Eliezer didn't make sense because it said exactly like Rabbi Yeshua said in that bright, and we'll start from the top of our daf in the middle of Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Since they changed their ways, meaning they went in a bad way, the people in the generation of the flood, God changed the creation and basically brought these rains, took out Kiman during the day and brought this flood. So we're going to have 2 questions on Rabbi Eliezer. That's only going to come up. The second question, the first question is, Bishlam al Rabbi Yeshua, Hainu dichtiv sheni. It says it happened in the second month. Now, second month, we already learned in the beginning of our Masechet that every time it counts months in the Gemara, it's always in the Torah, it's always based on Nisan. So second month is always Iyar. So how could you say second month is Cheshvan? Ella, Rabbi Eliezer, right? So Rabbi Yeshua, it makes perfect sense. Sheni is Iyar. Ella, Rabbi Eliezer, my Sheni. What is Sheni according to him? So the Gemara answers Sheni Ladin. Second to judgment. It's the month after judgment. Now you would think, oh, Rosh Hashanah is Yom Adin, so goes by that. No, what it means here is that Noach was told about the Mabul, or that God decided, he judged the people, decided that was going to bring the Mabul on Tishrei the previous year. So Sheni is counted it's the count. Again, we've been talking all along about different counts and how you can count different things from different times and different months. So Sheni is referring back to it. God said it's going to happen. And then on the second month, in the second year after God said it was going to happen, he brought the Mabul. So that's how he explains the first question. But now, Bishlam ala Rabbi Yeshua Hainu Dishina. We understand Rabbi Yeshua, everything was different than what nature, or what naturally should have happened, because it all happened in the time when it was spring. Everything the rains start drying out, the springs start drying up. Doesn't make any sense. And Kima is not out during the day during that time. But according to him, there is no change. So why does it say in the Braita? Because they changed their ways. God changed the way the world was supposed to run. So how do we explain this? Kidarav Chista. It didn't say this in the Braita, and that's a bit of a weakness. But the point is that there was a change, a big change. The Mabul wasn't just a flood of rain and a huge amount of rain, but as Rav Chista says somewhere else, the Amar Rav Chista, Berotchin kilkelu uberotchin nidonu. They sinned with boiling something. We'll talk about that in a minute. Therefore, they were judged with boiling water. In other words, the rain that came down, right? Normally rain is not hot. The rain that came down in the time of the flood was boiling water. That's what Rabbi Eliezer means when he said God changed Ma'aseh Bereshit. And he basically, changed the rules of nature by bringing boiling hot water. So, by the way, this concept of God changing nature to punish the people is an interesting concept, right? Because again, it's first of all, it's midah keneged midah, as we know, right? Tit for tat. You do this, you changed your ways, I'm going to change my ways. I think it's also a way of God reminding them that the world was created by God, right? And I have the God is saying, I have the power to change Maaseh Bereshit, right? Here, God created the world. Now he's saying, I could create it all differently, right? You're not in control. Basically, I'm the one in control. So now what's Birotchin Kilkalu? Ba'avera doesn't really help us, right? In sin with boiling. So what does that mean? So the commentaries say what we mean here is they sinned with licentious behavior, which is with semen, which gets hot and is heated, is a heated material or substance. So therefore, they're saying Birotchin, which is in Giloi Arayot, therefore Birotchin Nidonu. Okay, and that's how the water came down. It was boiling, and that's how Rabbi Eliezer explains things were different than the way the world was supposed to be. How do we know this? Like, where does he get this from out of the blue? So we're just going to have a verse that's going to explain. K'tiv hacha, vayashoku hamayim. It says the word vayashoku hamayim. The water, normally we assume it means calm down. Okay. What he's going to say is vayashoku, the shoresh shinkaf, which is going to be shinkaf kaf in another place, but shinkaf here is it cooled down. Okay. How do we know it cooled down? K'tiv hatam in the Megillat Esther, it says v'chamat hamelech shachacha. The anger of the king also calmed down, but normally we talk about anger heated up and it cooled down. So we see there it cooled down, the anger of the king. Here also cooled down, meaning it must have been boiling hot. And vayashoku hamayim means the water cooled down. Okay, so that's how we resolved now Rabbi Eliezer. We now have an interesting section that's kind of difficult to understand. Okay, I'll already preface it. It's a braita. Usually braitot are easy to understand. This one's quite complicated, which means also when I say that, I mean that the commentaries struggled with how exactly to understand this. Chachmei Yisrael monim lamabul keRabbi Eliezer, u'litkufa keRabbi Yoshua. Jewish chachamim, the sages, they determined, okay, this is like almost halacha l'maaseh, even though it's not exactly the maaseh here, but a little bit, there's a little bit of halacha here, that they count the mabul and therefore also creation like Rabbi Eliezer, that it all happened in Tishrei. However, litkufa keRabbi Yoshua. Okay, now, so what is this and what is that? For what do we count for Nisan? For what do we count from Tishrei? So some of the commentaries explain, and this is the way that made the most sense to me, so I'm going with it, which is litkufa keRabbi Yoshua. We have something called the Birkat HaChama. We make a blessing on the sun. It's when the sun is in the position exactly where it was when the world was created. So now you can make this blessing only when was the world created? It was in a Nisan, right? When it's the exact position that it was when the world was created. There's a tradition about when this is. It's every 28 years. And they go for that issue by Nisan. So you say the bracha in Nisan, which really means that they believe the world was really created in Nisan, which is interesting because you probably would have guessed Tishrei, because we always count Rosh Hashanah from Tishrei, all that. But no, we really believe, our tradition goes by, it was really from Nisan. And that's when we say the Birkat HaChama, we do it from Nisan. But for other issues, they count it from Tishrei. Okay, so one second. So there's different explanations about what exactly this is. Okay, in fact, I'll just read you so you won't believe me. The Quran says the early authorities had difficulty with this statement. Okay, see the read who writes he doesn't understand this phrase or Rashi's explanation of it. Okay, so it's very confusing what exactly this means. Okay, and some, right? So what does it mean from the creation is from Tishrei? So some of it is about determining the new moon when the molad is, right? Every month we announce on Birkat HaChodesh, right, when the new molad is going to be. So maybe that has to do with, again, it's not exactly clear what does it mean that they really count. So in some sort of calculation, the calculation of the molad goes from as if the world was created from Tishrei, but it becomes this very strange thing that even though we're really saying the world was created in Nisan, for certain elements, which again, is not clear which elements, we count it from Tishrei. Okay, and later we're going to get back to this idea that that people also count it from Tishrei, right? If I ask you when's the beginning of the year, first of all, our years go from then, right? That's maybe another thing. Counting our years, it just became Tafshin Pei Bet. That was in Tishrei. That wasn't in Nisan. Even though we really believe that the world was created in Nisan, it becomes this crazy thing that, right? It doesn't really make much sense that we really think the world was created in Nisan, but we really count the years from Tishrei. Strange. Then the commentaries talk about how there's some discrepancy and there's this. And anyway, it's a very complicated issue. We're going to leave it aside for right now and understand it in a kind of simple manner, but anyone who wants to can try to look into it more. And then we have this other kind of confusing line, because I don't know the relevance of this, but I don't know which Chachmei Umot HaOlam and what the relevance is. This is certainly doesn't seem to have halachic relevance, but the Gentiles of the world count like Rabbi Yoshua, okay, that it happened in Nisan and not in Tishrei, which is interesting because we always think of Nisan as the date. If you hadn't learned these sugyot, you'd tell me, right, that Nisan is special for the Jewish people and Tishrei is for the whole world, because we always really think the world was created in Nisan. Then that's what's the real reason? Because we celebrate Rosh Hashanah as the first day of the year, right? And we count our years from it. So we have this sense that for us, that's the Jewish calendar, right? But for Tishrei is usually the universal holiday and Nisan is our own special holiday. But here it really says no. Tishrei is our Rosh Hashanah, but really other nations think it's from Nisan. Obviously, we know calendar nowadays, right? It's not either. Anyway, what that means is also another good question. Liyirakot. Okay, now we're done. We're done with that section of the Mishnah. I'm going to go back and read the Mishnah. I'm just going to point out again that we're on page Yud Bet, the 12th page or 11th page of this Masechet, page number 12, technically, because it doesn't start at Aleph on the first page, but we're still on the first Mishnah. Okay, I've said this before. It's usually typical of beginning a Masechtot that the first Mishnah takes up a lot of space. Maybe not always 12 pages, but sometimes yes. We're still on the first Mishnah. So let's go back to the first Mishnah. Maybe by the end of this, you'll know the Mishnah by heart. Okay, 4 Rashi Shanim Haim. There's 4 Rosh Hashanahs. I'm just going to repeat this again. It's good review. Echad b'Nisan Rosh Hashanah lemelachim, right, for kings, Jewish kings, and regalim, and holidays. Right, that was all Rabbi Shimon, who the holidays start from Chag HaMatzot. Be'echad be'Elul Rosh Hashanah leMaaser Behema. The first of Elul, we're going to have a machloket. First of Elul Maaser Behema, because when do the animals normally give birth? Or is it Be'echad b'Tishrei, which is the next opinion, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, and we're in Be'echad b'Tishrei. Be'echad b'Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah l'shanim, lishmitim, right? Shanim, we had a whole question. Is it shtarim avumot? Is it shtarot avumot ha'olam? Is it maybe something else? Lishmitim, for the Shemitah year. For Yovlot, right, determining the beginning of the Yovel, we said that was all Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broku, who says it starts at Rosh Hashanah and not on Yom Kippur. Linitiah for Orla, that was the last thing we were on, which was all about Orla and the years of Orla. Liyirakot. Okay, yirakot we understood to mean maaser. So your vegetables, okay, when you pick them, it goes after picking. And when you pick them, that determines what year of maaser you're in. Remember, maaser, there's a cycle of 7 years. First, second, fourth, and fifth. You bring Maaser Rishon and Maaser Sheni, which is the Maaser Rishon goes to the Levi. The Maaser Sheni has to go to Jerusalem, and you eat it in Jerusalem. The third and sixth year of the cycle, instead of the Maaser Sheni, you still bring Maaser Rishon. We're going to see this all inside today. Maaser Ani, you bring, instead of the Maaser Sheni, you bring to Yerushalayim, you give it to poor people. And in the 7th year, you don't bring Maaser at all. So when do we determine? It's going to have 2 relevances. Talk about this in a few minutes. We'll see a Braita. But Maaser, we determine by Echad b'Tishrei, the year. So Tana. Now we're going to bring a Braita that says the following. And then for a while, we'll deal with this Braita, go back a little bit to the Mishnah, and then eventually we'll finish with the Braita and go back to the Mishnah entirely. Liyirakot u'lemaasrot u'lenidarim. The first of Tishrei is the first day of the year for yirakot, vegetables, maasrot. Okay, maybe you already figured out a problem here. Didn't we say yirakot is maaser? So why are we saying maasrot? And nidarim, vows. Okay, we'll get to that toward the end of today's daf. Liyirakot ma'ininu. So what are yirakot? Maaser yerek, right? If that's the case, if it's for maaser, well then hainu maasrot. That's exactly maasrot. So seems to be repetitive. Say tana de rabbanan bekatani de oraita. Yerek are only obligated in tithing them, in the tithes, on a rabbinic level. Why? The Torah talks about maser digancha, tiroshcha v'yitzarecha. Digancha is your grains, right? Your breads and wheats and all that. Your tiroshcha, tirosh is grapes. Yitzhar is tirosh, by the way, is really wine, things that come from grapes. And yitzhar is the oil that comes from the olives. So basically, you're only obligated maaser from those 3 things on a doraita level. The rabbi said everything else is also obligated in maasrot, but from the Torah law, it's not. So yerek is referring to all those other vegetables that are only on a rabbinic level, and maser is referring to the doraita. So now the Gemara has two questions. If that's the case, if you were going to say there's Torah level and there's rabbinic level, and both of them have the same Rosh Hashanah, you would have started with the Torah, not with the rabbinic. So why are we starting with the rabbinic? So they say, this is an answer that comes up a lot in the Gemara, because it's beloved upon them, therefore they do it first. What does that mean? It means that anything that's rabbinic, the rabbis liked a lot because it was something that they came up with on their own. Like when you come up with something on your own, it's more beloved to you than something that someone tells you. So there's something that they really like about the Rabbanans because of that. And therefore they put that first rather than second. Okay, that makes sense. But now we have a question of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah only said Yirakot. It didn't say Ma'asrot. So Tana Didan, our Mishnah, Tana de Rabbanan, V'kosh Ken De'oraita. Ours only said Yirakot. So what our Mishnah was saying was, the Rabbanans, this is the date. And then obviously whatever's on a Doraita level, on a Torah level, would also be the same date. They don't even need to mention. So the Braita thought need to mention it. Our Mishnah didn't. Okay, that's two different styles. Now, that's what was our mention of the Mishnah. We're leaving our Mishnah again and going back to this Braita. And as I said, we're going to deal with this Braita all the way till the end of today's daf. Next question. The Litnei Ma'aser, why does it say Ma'asrot, plural? Should have just said Maaser. For purposes of Maaser, you would have said it in singular. So they say, it's to teach you Achab Maaser Behema, Achab Maaser Dagan. One of the reasons I reviewed the Mishnah was to remind you there's a debate about Maaser Behema. Is it the first of Elul or is it the first of Tishrei? So here we see it's according to this Braita, Ma'asrot are all Achab Tishrei. They must hold like Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, who say the Maaser Behema is the first of Tishrei, and that's why it says Ma'asrot. It's referring to two different types of Ma'aser, the animal and the fetch and the fruit and the fruits and vegetables, right? Some are fruits, some are vegetables. Because again, it's the Doraita ones. Now they say, okay, if we're already asking on Ma'asrot why it's in plural, what about Yerakot? Why is that in plural? The Litnei Yerek. It should have just said Yerek, a vegetable. Trei Gavne Yerek. They want to say, there's two types of vegetables. Ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah, Yerek HaNe'egad. In other words, there's two different dates for when vegetables, now here it's when they become worthy to tithe. Things have to have, we've talked about this many times, Gemar Malacha. They have to be finished and ready, and only then are you obligated to tithe them. Until then, you're not obligated. The obligation doesn't kick in. So the question is, when does it kick in? And there's two categories. And that's why Yerakot is referring to both. If it's Yerek HaNe'egad, if it's something that's sold in bundles, like for example, you buy scallions, you usually buy them in a bundle. So if they're sold by the bundle, Mishayaged, so it's once it's tied up in the bundle, that's when it's obligated to tithe them. Vishe'eino ne'egad, but if it's sold separately, then Mishim alei takli. It's when you put them in some sort of utensil, that's when they're ready to be sold, and that's when it's considered Gemar Malacha. They'd be obligated in tithing them. Now we're going to get to a Braita, which tells us the relevance of these dates. What's the relevance? Two issues. One, likek yerek erev Rosh Hashanah ad shelo tavo hashemesh. If you start gathering vegetables on erev Rosh Hashanah, I don't know why you'd be doing this right before Rosh Hashanah, but right, sometimes I go out right before Shabbat and I collect spices for Shabbat. Right? It could be you can't collect them on you can't cut them on Rosh Hashanah, so you do it right before. But chazar v'liket mishetavo hashemesh. Then you gathered more once the sun set. Now, I just said you can't do that on Rosh Hashanah. So what are we talking about here? A few different options. It could be it was already cut and you're just bringing it in. You're collecting it and bringing it inside. And maybe that's allowed. Although maybe that's not allowed. Some people say what we mean is someone else did it for you, like a Gentile came and did it for you. Alternatively, they could be just giving some very theoretical case because they want to show you what the significance of the date is and not that you'd actually this would ever really happen. So 3 different ways to understand this. But in any case, here's an example of right before the Rosh Hashanah you collected, right when it became the new year you collected, right on the border there. You can't put them all in one group and say, I'm taking Maaser, let's say I have 10. I'm taking a 10th from here, right? One of the fruits for all of them, because you can't, I mentioned this when we learned the Mishnah. You can't mix new and old based on this date. It's whatever's before the date gets maaser together with its own fruits that are maaser that were from before. Whatever's after that date gets done separately. You can't mix the two. Next thing, if it was that you started collecting at the end of the second year of the cycle of these years, now we're going to talk about the maaser sheni, the maaser ani, and then you collected more right as Rosh Hashanah was starting, then it's shniya nechneset lashlishit, shniya maaser rishon u'maaser sheni, shlishit maaser rishon u'maaser ani. So what you collected in the second, that was still in the second year, that erev Rosh Hashanah, that's going to have maaser rishon and maaser sheni. What you collected in the third year, right, 5 minutes later, is already going to be considered that you have to bring maaser ani instead of maaser sheni, as I mentioned earlier today. So now they want to know, how do we know that, number one, the third year you bring maaser ani and not maaser sheni? Okay, now it's obvious to us, and maybe it wasn't obvious to you a while ago, but now you know, if you didn't know it earlier, about this cycle of the years, right? That maaser ani replaces maaser sheni. This bright is going to suggest that maybe when the Torah tells, now the reason we get this is because the Torah says it. And I'll read you the pasuk right now, which they're going to quote in a minute. Ki techalel la'aser et kol maaser tvuatam in Dvarim chapter 26, verse 12. When you start to do all your maaser, b'shana shlishit, in the third year, shnat maaser, the year of the maaser. We'll have to explain why that's there. You give it to the poor people, right? The needy. Okay, the Levi who doesn't have other stuff, although he gets the maaser rishon, the Levi there, and the pasuk was a little bit strange. But the ger, right, the person who's a stranger in your land, the yatom, the almanah, right, the orphan, the widow, the people who need help, and they'll eat with you. So there it says you give it to the poor people. But the question is going to be, maybe this is an additional maaser. Right, really, it sounds like, I would say the pshat of the pasuk is, in addition to giving whatever else you normally give, in the third year, there's a special maaser that you're supposed to give, which is called maaser ani. And then you give maaser rishon, maaser sheni you bring to Yerushalayim and eat it there, and the maaser ani you have to give to the poor people. So that's what the Bright is going to ask. How do we know that on the third year, it's only maaser rishon and maaser ani? So Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, ki techalel la'aser et kol maaser tvuatcha b'shana shlishit shnat ha'maaser. That's the pasuk we just read. So now they say, why does it say shnat ha'maaser? First of all, note it's in singular form, even though really you're bringing plural maasrot because you're bringing maaser rishon and maaser ani. But they say shana she'en ba'ela maaser echad. What does it mean? Haketzad? How does it only have maaser echad? Maaser rishon u'maaser ani u'maaser sheni yivtal. Say it like this. Maaser is in the singular form to say that this maaser is replacing the maaser sheni. Don't think that you have to bring also maaser sheni and also maaser ani. But now we have an obvious problem, which is if it says maaser, you are bringing two. You're bringing maaser rishon that goes to the Levi, and you're bringing maaser sheni that goes to the poor people. So it still isn't singular. So now the Breita suggests, o eno ela, or maybe af maaser rishon nami yivtal. Ulai, maybe maaser rishon also you're not supposed to bring. Shnat maaser comes to say, forget your normal year. Normal year, maaser rishon to the Levi. Maaser sheni, go bring to Yerushalayim and eat there. But in this year, just one maaser ani. So how do we know that it's maaser rishon and maaser ani? And we understand maaser sheni gets canceled. That's clear from the singular form of maaser. But how do we know that you're supposed to still bring maaser rishon? So they say, Talmud Lamar, Ve'el ha-Leviim tidaber. They're now quoting a different verse from Bamidbar about the Levi. And it says, tell the Leviim, Va'amart alehem, ki tikchu me'et b'nei Yisrael et ha-maaser asher natati lachem me'itam b'nachalatchem. When you get the maaser from the Jews who are going to give you the maaser, that I gave to you bin nachalatchem. What does it mean bin nachalatchem? Well, the Levites don't really have nachala. This is for you, your inheritance, your land. This is like your nachala, what you're supposed to get. Now, hikishoa katuv lenachala. They say their maaser is like nachala. Now, you tell me, if you inherit land, right? Ma nachala en lahefsek. It's continuous. You don't get the land for X number of years and then you don't get it for a year and then you get it back. No, it's always your land when you get it benachala. So therefore, af maaser rishon en lo hefsek. From there, we learn I'm assuming we're going to see another verse that proves this, different opinion. But this pasuk proves that the Levi always gets Maaser Rishon no matter what. And that's why from the word Shnata Maaser, we learn Maaser Ani replaces Maaser Sheni. But it doesn't get rid of Maaser Rishon. That always stands because the Levi always gets it. It's their Nachala. So now we're going to bring Tanya. It says Tanya Idach, but most of them change it to Tanya Namihachi, which means another Braita to support exactly what we just said. There's only going to be one difference, which is there's going to be two opinions about where we get the Maaser Rishon is continuous. Ki techalel asel. So again, they quote our verse. That's the beginning of the Braita. Shana she'em ba'ela maaser echad. So again, it said, they don't quote the whole thing, or I guess maybe this Braita was just written in short form, because it says Shnata maaser. From there, we learn one maaser. Ha ketzad, how does this work? What maaser is it? Maaser rishon u'maaser ani. It's still maaser rishon, and it's maaser ani u'maaser sheni yivtal. But no maaser sheni is exactly word for word what we just saw. Yachol, and this also, Yachol af maaser rishon ami yivtal. You would have thought also maybe you get rid of Maaser Rishon because it's singular. Talmud Lomar, and here's a different proof. Uba HaLevi. Okay, this is a different verse. It's in Sefer Dvarim, Perek, chapter 14. It says, at the end of 3 years, take out your stuff and put it outside. Uba Levi, okay, and the Levi will come because he doesn't have a share with you. So now they darshan this. Uba Levi, the Levi will come to get food. So how did they darshan it? Very interesting drasha. They say, Kozman sheba tainlo. This means whenever he comes, you have to give him. So basically this means the Levi gets whenever he wants, because it says, and the Levi will come and get your stuff. That means he can always have rights to your to your food, meaning you always have to give him, meaning there's no such thing as no Maaser Rishon. Clearly, Maaser Ani does not replace Maaser Rishon. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, tzarich. You don't need that pasuk because you have it much more clear in this pasuk. And this is going to be, again, we brought this Braita to say there's a Braita that supports exactly what we just said. Here it goes. This is your nachala, your inheritance. So there's the exact Rasha. I'm not going to repeat it again, but we just said, right? It's continuous. Therefore, the Maaser Rishon is continuous. So either because the Levi can come anytime they want, they have rights to it, or they have rights to it because this is their nachala. They don't get any other nachala. Everyone else has nachala, land that they keep forever, so they get to have the food forever, always given to them. Okay, remember where we are? We started with the Braita on Yerakot, right? Once we finished the whole discussion about the Rosh Hashanim of the years and when the world was created, then we moved on to this next section, the Mishnah Yerakot. From there, we immediately quoted a Braita Yerakot, Ma'asrot, and Nidarim. So we went into Yerakot and Ma'asrot. Why are they in plural? Why are they both there when really Yerek is Ma'asel? What does it mean that there's a Rosh Hashanah for it, that you don't combine years, right? That also it's in terms of knowing when Maaser Sheni and when Maaser Ani is, that's the determining fact, date, Aleph B'Tishrei. And now we're getting to that last line in that Braita, the last word, it said Nidarim, also for vows, okay, which didn't come up in our Mishnah at all. So what does this mean? What's the relevance of a vow and having a Rosh Hashanah for vows? Seems very weird. I mean, unless you think about the fact that we do a Tarat Nidarim, right? We undo our vows, but that's not what they're referring to. Right? We do that on Rosh Hashanah, basically on Erev Rosh Hashanah, which is interesting. I actually just thought of this right now, this connection between Erev Rosh Hashanah, where matir our Nidarim, right? We do, it's called Tarat Nidarim. We undo all our vows on Erev Rosh Hashanah. It's funny. I usually end up doing it on Erev Yom Kippur, and I don't like, even though the minhag is Erev Rosh Hashanah, but lots of people do it Erev Yom Kippur. It kind of turned into our minhag, but now I'm thinking that maybe we should start doing it really Erev Rosh Hashanah, because if that's the year for Nidarim, then maybe that's it. Although the Gemara doesn't really understand it that way. They're going to bring a Braita, which says it's for a different issue, kind of like the house rental. Okay, this sounds exactly like the renting a house, other than one big difference. Hamudal hana'ah mechavero l'shana. If I say, just like we said, I'm renting you my house for a year, if I say, I'm taking a vow that I will not benefit from you at all for a year. If I say that, what do I mean by for a year? Just like with the house rental, I mean 12 months. That's a standard year. But if I said this year, even if I was on the 29th day of Elul, the very last day of the year, we say, and this is where it differs from, right? It's similar to the rental because we said the difference between for a year or for this year. If you say for this year, you mean, right, the date that we were talking about. So now they say, Kevan shegiya yom echad b'tishrei al talo shana. Since you got to the first of Tishrei, right, you're done. If I say to you, I'm vowing I'm not going to get any benefit from you for this year, I mean just till today. That's all I mean. So the Gemara asks, or it comments and says, Afilu l'man damar. Remember we had a whole machloket. Can one day count as a year or not? So even manda amar yom echad b'shana eino chashuv shana. Remember with the par, do we have one day or a whole month do you need? Even the one who says one day is not considered a year, in this case they would agree. Why? He brought it upon himself. Usually you vow to use the word litza'are, to torture himself, to put himself in an uncomfortable position. Right? Often we take vows because we want to kind of hold back from something that we really normally want to benefit from. So hayitztarle, even one day of holding back, he fulfilled what he wanted. Okay, now this is very interesting. Why is this interesting? This is very relevant, right? How many times I know this goes on in my house, Erev Rosh Hashanah, right? Everyone makes all these jokes. Oh, I'll see you next year. Or, oh, right. It's all about, and you talk, oh yeah, this year, I promise I won't do this. When you say that on Erev Rosh Hashanah, it's very likely that you really mean just today, because you're kind of making a joke almost. And you're saying this year, knowing that this year is ending tomorrow. So it actually makes perfect sense in terms of the laws of Nidarim, and we're going to see it in a minute. The Gemara is going to say it explicitly, which is when it comes to Nidarim, we have this principle. Maybe I'll read it and then I'll talk about it. The next question, the Gemara is Ve'ema Nisan. Why is it Tishrei and not Nisan, right? And that's how we get to Tishrei and not Nisan. We said Nisan is the Rosh Hashanah for all sorts of other things. Maybe year should be Nisan. To which they answer, B'nidarim halach achar lashon b'nei adam. I think this is a fascinating line. It's fascinating. First of all, we're going to learn it when we get to Nidarim. A neder is not a halachic issue per se, in terms of when we say, what did I mean when I took this neder? It doesn't come under the same rules of normal halacha. Why is that? Because all of neder and the Masechet Nedarim, when we get there, is all about what did I mean when I said what I said? As I say something that's not 100% clear what I mean. And the question is, what do we think I meant? So what do we go by? We don't go by halachic definitions. We go by what the jargon on the street is, what people mean when they say it. Now, if I asked you on the street, when is the beginning of the year? You would definitely tell me Tishrei. You wouldn't tell me Nisan. Nobody says Nisan is the first day of the year, even though Birkat HaChama, we do based on, right, this blessing on the sun, we do based on that the world was created in Nisan. But nobody talks that way. When people talk, they go by Tishrei. They say that's the beginning of the year. I mean, they might go by the Gregorian calendar also. That's a whole separate thing. Here we're talking within Jewish law. Because of that, when someone says, I'm not going to benefit for you for this year, we go by what this year means in the general jargon of the way people speak, and not in terms of what really is the first day of the year. That's not a relevant factor, what halacha determines to be the first day of the year. It's relevant what people assume is the first day of the year, because Nidarim, all we care about is what people meant by what they said. And people mean what normally people, we assume the average person speaks in the way that normal people speak. Now, obviously, some people, there's some people out there that are a little eclectic, do their own thing, speak their own language, but we have to go in terms of law, we go by what the average person thinks Rosh Hashanah is. And therefore, we're going to go by with Tishrei, which is very interesting in terms of this concept of Nidarim in general. And I think it's fascinating in terms of all that we've been learning, that there's so many different Rosh Hashanah and there's so many different meanings. But in the end, they basically say that when the people on the street say Rosh Hashanah, they mean, right, when they say first of the year, they mean Rosh Hashanah, okay, Tishrei, which is interesting also because it matches our reality. It's not the kind of thing that's changed since then, which you might think, right? When we go after Lashon B'nei Adam, that's something that might change over time. In this issue, it really hasn't changed. Okay, last section for today. Now we're going to start a section that will continue more tomorrow. We finished the Breita now. The Breita that we quoted, I told you, we're going to finish it toward the end of the daf. We quoted Yirakot, Ma'asrot, Nidarim. We've dealt with that. Now we're back to the Mishnah, which was just said Yirakot, and now we want to talk about Yirakot in general in this year of Maaser. So they quote a Mishnah in Masrot, which actually is talking about not our topic exactly. Our topic is right? When do we determine what year is going to be the year for, right? For Maaser Rishon, and for Maaser Sheni, Maaser Ani, right? What's the date, the cutoff date? This is talking about when a vegetable is obligated in tithing, okay? In taking, there's Gumar Malacha we've talked about. It has to be ready for use or some sort of, right? If I cut it, let's say at some early stage, even if I do Gumar Malacha for it, but it was so early, I'm not going to actually be obligated. So now, and yes, we'll get to this, Becky. Fruits are Tu B'Shvat, not, okay, this is vegetables, not fruits, okay? But we're going to mix in fruits here, and it's a little bit confusing because it's good you're asking that, because we're going to talk about when they grow and the idea of their growth. But when it comes to the fruits that we're talking about, the date is Tu B'Shvat. When it comes to the vegetables, the date is Tishrei. So it's a little bit confusing. The Gemara is not going to really explain all that, but that's kind of behind the scenes. You have to know that. So the Mishnah says, Hatiltan, which is fenugreek, Misha Titzmach. Okay, it actually doesn't list only tiltan, it lists all sorts of things. So we're just quoting, kind of cutting, they just cut a slice of this Mishnah. It's considered ready once it sprouts. We'll talk about what does it mean sprout in a minute. Hatfu'ah v'hazeitim. Okay, this is a mixture of fruit, which is the olives, and the tfu'ah, the grains, which grow from the ground. Misha yaviu shlish, when they get a third. So again, as Becky said, if it's fruits, we're going to count from Tu B'Shvat. When it's vegetables, we're going to count it from Echad B'Tishrei. So, but the question is, right, when are they ready to bring for Masrot? Misha yaviu shlish, when they're a third. Now, a third what? So some people say a third ripened. Some people say a third of the weight they're going to ultimately become. There's a debate about what exactly this means. But this means at a certain age, we're only going to count it in the year that it was a third. So if, let's say, we plant it in 1 year, let's say a Maaser Sheni year, and then it grows to a third of its growth in the Maaser Ani year. Again, fruits is cut off, Tishrei is Tu B'Shvat, right? It's all a matter of before Tishrei or before Tu B'Shvat, depending if it's fruits or vegetables. But it became a shlish in the following year. We're going to go by the following year, not the previous year. Okay, even though I planted it, then it goes by shlish. So then we're going to assume that not just is this Mishnah referring to when there's Gmar Malacha, in other words, when they're going to be obligated in the tithing, but also refers to the dates, as I just discussed. So if it was a third before the year started, and now I cut it in the upcoming year, we're going to treat it by the previous year where it had already grown to a third. Okay, that's when it's the tuan is eitim, and the tiltan is misha titzmach. So the Gemara says, "My misha titzmach." What does that mean? Sprout. Misha titzmach lizraim, when it starts to sprout seeds. Okay, again, it's not really clear what this means. Some people say, right, if you plant, let's say, lentils or beans or things like that, when they start to sprout, you actually see a seed coming out. So you see an actual seed. So that's what it means when you start to see that sprout with the seed on it. Okay, that's much earlier than shlish, by the way. Where do we get this from? Now, remember, tfuah and zaitim, the reason why they're asking specifically about these and not about the tiltan and other things is because tiltan is not obligated in tithing from a Torah level. So there's certainly no verse to prove this from a Torah level. Only things that are obligated by Torah, like the tfuah, which is dagan, and the zaitim, which are yitzhal, which are obligated from the Torah. So where do we get this from? Okay, that basically that you're going to have, what happens here is if it grows a shlish in a particular year for Maaser, we're going to now prove it from a Shemitah case because it's the same as Shemitah. And from here, we're going to get to Shemitah, which is good because this is very relevant to those living in Israel this year, which is that things could grow in our year a third. Okay, let's say this year, Shemitah year. If they grow a third in the Shemitah year, then next year, they're going to have sanctity to it. Okay. Because that's basically, okay, Shemitah here you're going to learn is more than a year because there's all sorts of things that grow. Okay, now there's going to be different criteria for how you determine depending on what it is. So here they say, how do we know about the tuan, the zaitim, that it's when it gets to be a third? Some people say in the name of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. The pasuk says, it's very strange pasuk. This is Hakel, the mitzvah of Hakel. We're supposed to gather all the people together and start reading from the Torah. When do we do it? At the end of the Shnat HaShemitah, b'moed, on the holiday of Sukkot. Okay, you do it b'moed Shnat HaShemitah b'Chag HaSukkot. Okay, on the time of Chag, right, of the Shnat HaShemitah and Chag HaSukkot. But what do you mean? It's after 7 years. We're not anymore in the Shemitah year. We're in the 8th year of the Shemitah cycle when we do Hakel. So why does it say b'moed Shnat HaShemitah? Shnat HaShemitah Maya b'idite b'Chag HaSukkot. It's not Shnat HaShemitah anymore. So they say Shminiti, it's the 8th year. Ela lomar lecha kol tfuah sheviah shlish b'shvi'it l'fnei Rosh Hashanah ata noheg ba minhag shvi'it b'shminit. Any grains, this is to teach you. There's some things of Shemitah that are still in the 8th year. Yes, 8th year is still Shemitah year, right? So for all those who think this is 1 year, no, it's really 2 years Shemitah, because certain things, if they brought a shlish, the tfuah and the zaytim, if they were a third grown in the year, the Shemitah year, then when it comes time for the upcoming year, right, you're going to have to treat them with sanctity. Those are basically Shemitah produce. Okay, we're going to get to the whole thing about batar chanata, batar l'kita. The vegetables are when you pick them. Fruits go when they budded, and the reason for that is all going to come up on Daf Yudalid, so we'll get to that then. Okay, but do you have minhag ken atano hegbo? If that's the case, atano hegbo minhag shvi b'shmini. So sometimes you have the 8th year, but you're still treating it as Shemitah. Okay, Gefet this week is all about, it'll be up later today. It's all about this topic. And there's a big machlok at Rashi, Tosfot, and the Ritva here. What exactly we're referring to? Is this all about Kedusha? This sounds like it's talking about Tosefet Shvi'it, right? Now, if you base it, this is a way of saying we learn that there's Tosefet Shvi'it also in the 8th year, right? But, and Rashi seems to say this is the same thing that we learned previously from B'charishu B'katsir Tishbot. So why do we need 2 verses? And there's a whole debate about why we have this and B'charishu B'katsir Tishbot. But I'll give you a little bit of an inkling. It could be that one is referring, B'charishu B'katsir Tishbot is possibly referring to working the land, that there's Tosefet Shvi'it about you can't work the land extra time. And there's also Kedushat Shvi'it, which is what still has sanctity of the Shemitah year in it. In other words, there's 2 issues of Shemitah that we really grapple with. One is the working of the land, and 2 is the sanctity that there is in those fruits. And maybe this is referring to the sanctity, and that one was referring to the Yisroel Melachah. Not everybody holds this way, but it's an interesting way to read it. And then it deals with the 2 issues that are most relevant in Shemitah. I just want to point out one strange thing about the structure here. It took something that was referring to, we were talking about Ma'asrot, and it brought a proof text from Shemitah. But again, you have to assume what's counted for the Shemitah year, since Shemitah is this cycle of the 7 years when we count Ma'asrot also, right? There's 1, 2, 4, and 5. Maser Sheni, 3 and 6 Maser Ani, and 7 is Shemitah, and there are no Masrot. So if the date's going to have to be the same for all of them, so it's going to match up. So therefore, it's not so crazy that we brought a Shemitah to prove the Maser. With that, we'll finish for today, and we're going to continue more along with this in tomorrow's Shiur. And again, I recommend you listen to Gefet to get a bit of a sense of, again, it's a more in-depth learning that we don't get to do in our class, which is really analyze, right? Not just read a Rashi and a Tosfot and a Ritva, but analyze them and think about them more in depth and understand what's behind, what's motivating them, comparing sugyot. They compare the sugya on Daf Tet with B'charishu B'katsir Tishbot. So it's a more in-depth type of learning. It gives you a different style of how to learn Gemara in a different way than we do here, because Daf Yomi is one style, but there's many others. So with that, I'll wish everyone a great day.